Hello and welcome back to the Matrix Green Pill podcast. I'm Hilmarie Hutchison, and today I am thrilled to introduce a truly inspiring guest, Timothée Desormeaux, one of the brilliant minds behind Acquisit. What started as a bold challenge to the long-standing agency giants has quickly evolved into a success story marked by innovation, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. Despite being a young and relatively small company, Acquisit has already earned the trust of some global brands like L'Oreal, Calvin Klein, and Birkenstock. Let's just jump right in. Timothée, welcome and thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Mary. Thanks a lot for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Excellent. So to start off, please could you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your background?
So I'm Tim. I'm French, as you can probably hear it, or maybe not yet, but you will soon. I'm 37. I am the father of 3 young children, and I have been in Dubai for the last 9 years. I'm one of the co-founders of Acquisit that we've launched back in 2019.
Going back to your early experiences, your family had a 5th-generation business back in the French countryside. How did this shape your entrepreneurial mindset and leadership approach?
That's actually a question I ask myself. Of course, there are a few values that probably passes, working hard, believing that tomorrow can be better than today. Those are probably sort of intangible values that are passing. But ultimately, I think it's about the perspective you have on the world. And I think this perspective is probably shaped a lot by how you've been educated. I think it's about, do you see the world like full of risk, or do you see the world full of opportunities? And if you see the world full of risk, then I think everything you do in your life, starting by, maybe getting a degree, planning your career, you will do everything to hedge against the risk that you perceive. And on the other hand, when you see the world as full of possibilities, it's more about how do I put myself in a position to catch those opportunities. Of course, I didn't realize that back then, but I think somehow this is how my father and mothers and my grandfather, so the whole line of entrepreneurs before me, somehow that infused how I was educated. So
that mindset of how you see the world either being full of risk or full of opportunity then guides you in the way that you go in life.
It's not directly related to your question, but one interesting thing in Dubai is that a lot of the people that move to Dubai, regardless of their job, regardless of their position in the society, they moved there because they believe that there was an opportunity for them. I think that makes Dubai and the UAE a very vibrant place just because of that.
I think that's a very valid point, because people are already open, looking for the opportunities. So that also then impacts the whole culture in Dubai, a place of possibilities and a place of opportunities. I think that's a very good observation. So then, having grown up in the French countryside, what was the next step in your career or in your life?
Yeah, so educated in the French countryside in Normandy, so the northwest of France. When I moved to Paris to do my study in business, a concentration in finance, during my study, I had the opportunity to travel already a little bit. And then I already knew back then that I wanted to be an entrepreneur at some point. I think right when I graduated from my master, I was like, okay, it's probably not the time now. So I started on the other side and I went to work for an investment fund that was backing entrepreneurs in Paris. And I worked there for a big year before actually starting a first entrepreneurial venture.
How did that first entrepreneurial adventure turn out for you?
It was full of learnings. It wasn't full of success. So I was 25. The other founder was a bit older. He had already sold the company successfully. He had another idea and he was looking for a co-founder. Long story short, we stopped after 6 months, not because the opportunity wasn't there, but I think we were not very aligned, the two of us, on how to approach it. At least at the time, I was under the impression I want to go very fast. I'm really hungry. And I didn't perceive exactly the same drive with my co-founder. So I've decided to jump out and we actually stopped. There is a lot of things that I've learned there because coming from an investment fund where it's a lot about analyzing everything and crunching numbers to put yourself in a position to make a decision. On the contrary, this first entrepreneurial experience was a lot about doing things, testing, see if it works. And then we were iterating on it. So I think the doer part of me comes from that first sort of failed experience.
Well, I'm happy that you shared this experience with us because I think lots of people see entrepreneurship with just rose-colored glasses and think, I'm going to be my own boss, I'm going to make millions. So for you to share this experience that going out and starting your first entrepreneur venture was not as successful as you had hoped, but that didn't hold you back. I think that's the big lesson, is to go out, have experiences. They might fail, but you learn something from them.
No, absolutely. I think the whole point is to keep on going, with the hope that you're going to succeed. In Europe, that culture is getting better, but it's not there yet. In the US, they're very comfortable with failing and then starting again. And a lot of the successful entrepreneurs that you see on the media, most of the time they've already crushed.
If you go back to what you said in the beginning, right, your view of the world, if your view is that it's all about risk, well, then you're not going to take those opportunities. But if you see it as an opportunity, well, then you're going to try and fail and then try again. But this is where your story gets really interesting. So now you've worked for a highly competitive investment company. You've started your own company and your career takes a sharp turn. Suddenly you are doing something I don't think our audience would expect. You become a tour guide. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it was a great moment of my life. I loved it. So when I quit the entrepreneurial venture, I was like, okay, I need to take some time to think what's the next move. Do I start something else just now, or do I join a young company, which ended up happening? I took a few months just to reflect on that. In the meantime, I didn't want to stay inactive. And at the time I was living in Paris. I was living in the very center of Paris, so very historical neighborhood. And I had some friends who had started like tour guide companies for American and British and Australians, English-speaking people that come to Paris to discover the city. That's the perfect job for someone who wants to work a few hours per day and have the time to reflect on what's the next move. I ended up liking it a lot. You were meeting people that you didn't know from, you never met them before. And you literally have a few minutes to create proximity and capture their attention. And if you manage to do that in the first 5 minutes, then they will listen to you for the rest of the hour or the rest of the hour and a half of the tour. That I've learned back then is something that I still use a lot today when we pitch clients and when we meet potential partners, is how do we break the ice literally in a few minutes so that we gain the time to explain them in more details what we do. Sometimes it's a bit complex. And so that skill that I think I've developed back then completely by serendipity, it wasn't planned, still very useful today.
I love that. So instead of just doing nothing and sort of licking your wounds, you said, no, I'm going to do something, keep myself active, but something low-key enough that I can decide what it is that I want to do next. And again, learning something out of the experience. I love that.
One of the great things of that job back then is that it's very rewarding because people literally, you see the impact that you have after your tour if you're good. And people come to you and they tell you, thank you so much, blah, blah, blah. They ask you for advice. And then they go on the TripAdvisor or whatever portal, they put a review about you. So it's a very ego-flattering job.
That sounds good. If a lot of people go on TripAdvisor to say good things, that means you're doing a good job. But also because I think when you enjoy your job, it reflects through, right, to the people that you are working with at that time.
Yeah, I think so too.
So then what happened? You decided now you've had your time as a tour guide, you decided to transition out of being a tour guide. What was the next step for you?
It wasn't a full-time job. It was summertime back then. And I was like, okay, summer is ending. I started to realize that I wanted to spend, rather than creating something from scratch, and I was like, okay, I need a bit of time here. I joined a very young company called Effilab. Back then we were 8. They were 8 or 9 people, and they were doing what we call performance advertising, which is still part of what we do at Acquisit today. They were growing very, very fast. And I think they were interested in I had a very analytical background back then due to the investment fund. And I was keen on joining a young team on something quite innovative back then, and still today, but especially back then. I've joined them. They were still in Paris. I learned the job. 18 months later, my wife got the opportunity to move to Dubai for her career. This is when we asked ourselves, okay, do we want to do that? And completely change our plans. So the company was split in 2 teams, and I was managing one of those teams. And I went to the founders of the company and told them, guys, I think there is probably an opportunity for us in Dubai because the whole region is growing quite fast and there is a lack of talents in this specific field. 18 months after I started in this company, I ended up opening the Dubai office.
And then that led you not long after to start up a new company, and that is Acquisit.
Yes, that's absolutely right. But basically, we opened the branch of Effilab. I opened the branch of Effilab in 2015, and then we created Acquisit in 2019. And I think in between, one of the key change was that Effilab was acquired by a much bigger company, a listed company back in Europe. They were doing like 1 billion turnover. We were just making a few hundreds of thousands. And They acquired the company not because of the Dubai office. Obviously, they acquired the company because of the footprint we had on the European market. Instead of being like a subsidiary of a small company where the co-founders that I knew very well, I was now part of a much bigger group. Interest of this group for the GCC market was not very strong. This is where it's back to seeing opportunity. This is where I was like, okay, if they don't have a plan for the region, the GCC or the MENA region, I have a plan. I don't need them to execute on these plans. In simple terms, I told them, hey guys, if you're not interested in this market, sell the company back to me. I'll take it over. And for them, since they had no specific plan for that market, we reached an agreement and we spinned off the branch of FILA. So at the time, we had a small team of 7-8 people. And this is how we laid the foundation of Acquisit. That's long story short, but there was one more element to it, is that simultaneously, the other co-founder of Acquisit, Edward, came to Dubai to open the branch of a French company focused on data science. And we've realized, okay, there is a whole market to be taken. Let's create something that caters for the needs of this specific market. This is how we created Acquisit.
Fantastic. So between the two of you, you could create some synergy between what you were bringing to the table and what he was bringing to the table. Then between the two of you, created something new, and that would be bigger and have more impact.
Absolutely. It actually came from the bottlenecks that we were seeing in the value chain of the industry. Edward was working more up the value chain, and it was very focused on data, on basically access to the data and finding patterns and insights into the data. And I was more focused on activating the data. And we realized that there was a lot of loss in translation between those two stages. And we decided to create a company that was sort of verticalizing the value chain to minimize those loss in translation. Yeah, that was the original thesis of Acquisit: help companies to put their data at the service of their marketing.
I know there's a lot of very important parts for you in being a leader and being an inspirational leader. So I'm trying to sort of think which is the questions to ask you to get the most out of our time together. Since this was a smallish company in Dubai that you and I created together, let's talk a little bit about building a team. How do you approach hiring and building a team that aligns with your values and vision for your company?
This is probably a step that is overlooked by a lot of companies. It starts by defining exactly who you are as a company, as an organization, and the main values that you stand by or stand for. Going through this exercise of formalizing a bit, okay, this is what makes us who we are. Then once you formalize, the next step is, how do you make sure that your recruitment process is infused by those values? Concretely, the way we do it today, and it's probably work in progress, and we're in constant iteration on that, we have dedicated step in a recruitment process that is called cultural fit interview, where towards the end of the process, the candidate meets with 4 different persons in the company that are not directly related to the position that he's going to have or that he or she going to have. The objective here is for us and for him or her to get a completely different perspective on the company, how we work together, how do we, to some extent, live together, as an organization, and to assess if he or she could fit into it. This is how concretely we're trying to materialize those values in the recruitment process. Of course, at the end of the day, you make a decision on a limited number of information. I think we have 3 to 4 interviews in our recruitment process. So there's only so much you can get. There is at least a clear intention to recruit people that not only have the hard skills that we're looking for, but also share the same values.
Excellent. So if I heard you right, you said the first step is for you to understand who you are as a company, what your values are, what you stand for, and then build that into the hiring process. And I like the idea of meeting different people during that hiring process. They can also get a feel for who the company is. Is this the kind of company that they want to be part of?
Absolutely.
How do you sort of relate it to that? Once you have your team in place, how do you cultivate a teaching mindset within your company? And why do you believe it's crucial for a company's long-term success?
I truly believe that the very first way of teaching or sharing knowledge is to try to decentralize this. It's a bit of a complex exercise because we have created something within the company. We have created something which is called the Center of Excellence. And the Center of Excellence, the role of the Center of Excellence is to centralize, enrich, and then distribute the knowledge. identifying the needs for education on specific subject needs to come from the team itself. There is a bit of decentralization in the sense that everyone is responsible of saying, hey, we need to get better here. We need to get more educated or get more exposure to that. And then there is a small department of 2 people that says, okay, we have gathered all the needs. This is how we prioritize them. And this is the materials that we create on the one that we have flagged as priority number 1 or main priorities. And I think this is almost the biggest challenge is how do you disseminate knowledge? Because it's one thing to create the knowledge or to create the materials that contain the knowledge. But then the adoption of that by the team is, to me, the thing that I find the most complicated. We're still not there as an organization.
I think that's something lots of companies deal with. It's one thing to put the knowledge out there, but how do you make sure that it's implemented and used? Because, there's always that learning period, right, where it takes extra effort to learn a new skill or a new system or a new process. Once you've done it, it's going to have a fantastic positive impact on your workflow, but it's that to find people who's committed to that learning period. So you can only teach, but the internalizing of that knowledge has to be done by each person. I can see why you say that's the difficult part of the process.
Absolutely.
How do you find purpose and fulfillment in your work, especially in a business that might not have an obvious social impact?
You can find purpose just regardless of the main object or the main subject that you're trying to tackle as a company. And you're right, we're not into social business. It's about the way you do things. The way we've developed the company, today we're completely self-funded, which means that the 2 founders are by far major shareholders of the company, and we don't have other big shareholders. Allow us to have a lot of room in how we want to manage this company of 65, 70 people today. There is a concept that is a bit more spread in the US that is called stakeholder capitalism versus shareholder capitalism, where you try to manage the company so that all the different stakeholders, there are 5 of them, the shareholders, the employees, obviously, the suppliers, the client, and the rest of the society. And basically, you're trying to assess every big decision you take, not only in the perspective of the shareholders, the financial ones, but in the perspective of who's going to benefit or who's going to suffer from that decision within all the stakeholders of the company. And I'm not saying we're doing that perfectly on every decision. I think this sort of broader view helps us to think, okay, the way we do things matter, even if the main subject that we tackle is not something that, in a sense, completely transforms the society. At least the way we're approaching things as a whole, and not only as a profit-making company, does help us to find purpose.
The decisions you make impact other people, and so you are very intentional with the decisions you make, and how is it going to impact those stakeholders, not just how much money am I going to make out of this? So I love that approach. So even though, as you say, it's not maybe a socially impact company, you are impacting others socially by the way you're doing business.
Absolutely.
Well, now it's time for one of my favorite segments of the show, our very own version of a game show. Are you ready for some rapid fire questions?
Shoot.
If you could have dinner with any entrepreneur, dead or alive, who would it be?
It's actually a French fellow with Bernard Arnault, the CEO of LVMH. I'm so very impressed with the way he built his empire in less than in 1 generation. I would be curious to hear.
What's one word your team would use to describe you?
Optimistic?
Yeah, seeing the opportunities in the world. What's your go-to productivity hack?
So I have 3 kids. So I have really at least 2 things of my life that I need to manage, the family and the business. One thing that helped me getting much more productive when I started being a dad is stop working late at night, but getting up early in the morning. So to me, early start is my hack.
What's your favorite book on business or marketing?
I'm not through it yet. I'm currently reading Unlimited Power by Anthony Robbins because I was a bit skeptical about it. And then I've heard a few interviews of entrepreneurs that I like that were saying this book completely changed the way I've approached things. I'm going through it now. So it's not my favorite. It's the one I'm reading now.
What is one thing you do every day, no matter how busy you get?
I spend time with my kids. To me, this is what keeps me running.
Well, thank you very much for playing along. That was the game show. That was easy enough. Now, before we wrap up, we'd like to do our green pill moment. What green pill advice would you give to your younger self?
It's obviously something I reflect on sometimes, especially being a dad. you're starting to think, what could I do to make the life of my kids great? Maybe I would think during a long period. Something I realized recently is the power of being extremely intentional about where you want to be or what you want to do in the next years. I think the main benefit of that is that it helps you to make arbitrage and say, okay, I'm not going to pursue it. This is a great opportunity, but if I do that, I'm going to do it at the expense of this and that, which are to me what really matter. So defining that, where you want to be as an individual, but also as an organization, defining it clearly helps you to make those arbitrage and then get your priorities right.
I think that's excellent advice because, as you say, sometimes what's put in our way or the opportunities, there's a lot of opportunities, but not all of them might serve us for our bigger goal or our bigger purpose. So to be very clear in where it is that we are going and to let go of good opportunities which might sidetrack us and take us off the path where we actually want to get to. I think that's excellent advice. Thank you for sharing that for your younger self and for your kids too. They'll benefit from that.
For my kids as well.
Tim, thank you so much for being here today and for sharing your compelling story. It's been incredibly inspiring. I've learned so much from you. You've had a fantastic journey, and I'm so sure our audience is going to love this conversation.
It was really my pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. Now, before we wrap up, could you let our listeners know where they can connect with you and follow your journey? And we'll also, of course, put this in the show notes.
The easiest way to connect with me is on LinkedIn, where I'm quite active. So I'm following every day and I'm trying to reply most of the messages that I receive. That's the best channel.
Yeah, if you're like me, you get a ton of messages every day. It is sometimes hard to keep up with answering all of them. So well done if you do respond to all of them.
I'm trying hard at least.
Thank you again for joining me. I wish you continued success, and for sure I'll be watching your journey as well.
Thanks a lot, Hilary, and congrats again on this podcast.
Thank you very much. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, share it with your friends, and leave us a review. Your support helps us bring more amazing guests like Tim to the show. Until next time, keep leveling up.
If you enjoy our conversations, please like and subscribe. See you next Wednesday.